Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on strategies to promote mineral exploration in South Africa, hosted in strategic partnership with the Industrial Development Corporation. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media's Contract Publishing. Before we begin, please be aware that we have enabled the Q&A function, so please post any questions into the Q&A box. You'll find this on the panel at the bottom of your screen. The panelists will answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the discussion. To encourage interaction, we have also enabled the chat function, so you can network with the panelists and other attendees via the chat box. You'll also find this at the bottom of your screen. Please do not, however, post any questions in the chat box, as we may miss them. Post those into the Q&A instead. Please be aware that we are recording this webinar and will be sending the recording to you when it's available. We are also streaming the webinar live to YouTube and will share the link in the chat once it's available. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Dr. John Bristow, CEO of Global Diamond Network. He is an experienced CEO and director with a successful track record in private and listed mid-tier and junior exploration, development, and mining companies. John will facilitate the discussion with our panel, which consists of Thabiso Sekano, SBU Head of Mining and Metals at the IDC, Sam Mokorosi, Head of Origination and Deals at the JSE, Errol Smart from the Minerals Council South Africa's Junior Miners Desk, as well as CEO at Orion Minerals, and Paul Miller, Director at Amaranth CX. We look forward to an engaging webinar on strategies to promote mineral exploration in South Africa. I'll hand over now to our facilitator, John Bristow, to set the scene and to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Shannon, and welcome to everyone attending this webinar, including the panelists who are all highly experienced in the field of exploration and obviously everything that goes with it, including development of mines. Just by way of background quickly, as Shannon said, I'm John Bristow, and I've had a wonderful career courtesy of geology and mineral exploration. And I've been fortunate to work probably in every country in the world where there's a diamond mainly, but and other than diamonds, other commodities too. And I've been able to see firsthand the benefits of real positive exploration. And I just want to stress that today we're looking to talk about exploration down at the grassroots level. Exploration that will unlock this amazing jewel box of mineral deposits that we still have in South Africa. And I think we are delinquent if we don't actually get back to proper exploration and try and liberate some of these mineral deposits. And I stress we're talking exploration here. And exploration, and hopefully that'll come out in the panel today, it creates new capital. It creates infrastructure, and most of all, it creates jobs. And I think all of us who live in this country will know only too well the economic challenges that the country faces, and even more frighteningly, the unemployment. So if we can get exploration going, one of the best ways to actually turn around this place and get people off the streets has to be exploration. So I'm quickly going to introduce the panel so that we can then get on to the questions. Creamer Media's team of really smart journalists have put together a series of short questions for each of the panelists, and that's ready to allow these experts to present their views on how we can restart exploration, which I think we all know that we don't have any real grassroots exploration in this country, or it's minuscule. And related to that, we haven't seen any new mine development, and I really stress new mine development, new capital going into the ground. We're not talking here, or I'm not talking or asking people about reprocessing and redeveloping old mineral deposits or ore deposits or old mines or tailings dumps. Those sort of processes happen normally in a healthy minerals and mining environment or jurisdiction. We want to, as I say, unlock the jewel box that still sits in the ground. So let me go straight on to the panelists. And first of all, I'd like to welcome Thabiso Sekano from the IDC, Sekano. Thabiso is the business unit head of mining and metals at the IDC. He's an experienced investment professional with a demonstrated history of working in the development financial institution space, with particular focus on basic metals and mining. And he's skilled in evaluating and assessing applications for funding of businesses. So welcome to Thabiso, and we look forward to his contributions. Hopefully, Reginald Demano will also join us. Reg is a mining and resources executive with over 20 years of experience in the business. Before his appointment to IDC, Reg was the CEO of West Coal Holdings. So he knows about the black stuff that we're all now trying to get rid of, strangely. And Reg also has extensive investment banking experience, and I think was a colleague of Paul Miller's at Nedbank. Our next panelist is Errol Smart. He's the CEO of Orion Minerals, and regularly in the press, given his developments and some of the challenges he has in places like Prieska to get our copper mining sector re-emerging and redeveloped. So Errol is a registered professional natural scientist. He has more than 30 years of broad industry experience in all aspects of exploration, mine development, and operations. He has a wealth of public and private corporate experience, and he sits on the Minerals Council of South Africa and is head of the junior miners desk. We then come to the JSE. Obviously, a critical part of all of this is, where the funds are going to come from for exploration. So Sam Mokorossi, Sam is the head of origination and deals at the JSE. He is a seasoned financial services executive with almost 20 years experience in corporate finance, private equity, and the bond market. He has successfully executed corporate finance and private equity transactions worth 40 billion. He's previously worked at Standard Banks, Cadiz, Corporate Finance, Quartile Capital, and Vunani Capital. And then Paul Miller. Paul will be known to many of us. He's a director of Amaranth CX. He too has a wealth of experience in minerals and mining. He's worked in the junior sector. He's developed new mines, and he continues to be very active in terms of gathering data and analyzing the situation of exploration in this country. So he's a business development specialist, apart from all his technical background. And he's, as I said, done mining and done exploration. His current interest is in improving the customer experience through sales cycles for sophisticated buyers of complex products and solutions, and very active in the sector overall. So from there, what I'd like to do now, that the panelists have seen and got their questions, and I'm going to start with the first question of each of the panelists for them to answer, so we get the actual discussion going. We're obviously also mindful of time so that we can have a decent discussion and also get to the questions and answers. So let's start with Thabiso at the IDC, who are a co-sponsor of this webinar. So Thabiso, welcome to the discussion and the webinar. And my question, and you will have it in front of you, is the IDC has argued that mineral exploration is crucial for the long-term growth of South Africa's mining sector. And you've also argued that exploration will promote employment, fiscal revenue, and foreign exchange earning. So let's hear from you briefly. What does the IDC believe that needs to be done to get greenfields exploration off the ground in South Africa on a sustainable basis? And I think the critical thing there is the sustainable basis as well.
Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everybody. From a long time ago, we realized at the IDC the gap that exists, in terms of the different funding models that are there, particularly in the life cycle project development in the mining sector. And we realized this gap that exists, with funding of early stage exploration. And it's been a sore point for us, and we have tried to come with mitigants in terms of how to deal with this particular challenge. while we recognize this gap, what we have done is the IDC has now engaged, the DMRE to come up with a fund. We've already approved as the IDC 100 million rands that can be used to capitalize this fund. Our aim is to go as high as 300 million rands at the later stage, so that we can use these funds for a variety of early stage exploration opportunities that may exist in South Africa, that may be able to unlock some of these opportunities that you spoke about: employment, foreign exchange earnings, and so on. So currently where we are in terms of this fund is that we are engaging with the DTIC to try and get to a point where the IDC can be viewed as a BEE facilitator in this fund, so that once we go out to the industry and invite the industry to come and participate with us on the fund, to put some funds alongside the IDC, the requisite recognition of points may be achieved by that a specific company that may come in and join in with us. So that's the first step that we are looking at, John, and we're hoping that it is the beginning of bigger things to happen in the future. And we are hopeful that once we conclude on these several work streams that we are on, and we finalize these things, we will be able to have a fund that we can then administer as the IDC, because we are experienced in assessing funding opportunities, and see how this thing grows from then onwards. Thank you. And I think that answers the sustainability issue that you are raising, that this is the beginning, is a green shoot. And obviously over time, we want to get it to a point where it can keep on growing and unlocking more opportunities.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Thabiso. I just put on the table too, and it's something we'll pick up on. Minister Mantashe has said we need to get South Africa back to the 5% of world exploration. And if you look at that number, it's something between 6.5 and 8 billion rand. So let's not forget that if we really want, and it's great what you guys are doing, but if we really want to go the full hog, and it's obviously not going to happen overnight, we need big bucks to really drive this process. So let's just bear that in mind. We'll come back to it. Errol, you've got a wealth of experience. You're actively involved. You obviously also represent the Minerals Council, which is a key player here from a mining perspective. What is the Minerals Council, and particularly, for example, your junior mining desk, doing to promote mineral exploration in South Africa, and what do you think's been achieved so far?
Look, John, I think the reality is we all know what the elephant in the room is. We need a regulatory environment that we can operate. The explorers will explore and the investors will invest if we've got a regulatory environment that's conducive to it. And it's a huge frustration to all of us. And we took the view 4 years ago when I got involved at the Minerals Council and became very active on this, is we could either complain and whinge and moan about it and throw up all the facts all the time on what the problems are, or we've got to get engaged and being part of the problem, part of the success of solving the problem. It's frustrating. It's not an easy walk when you're dealing with government and the DMRE. We have come a long way though. We are starting to find each other. And I think the most frustrating thing is, it's amazing when we speak to the DMRE, or when we speak to Council for Geoscience, or to any of the players in this game, everybody knows what the solution is. It's not like anybody on this panel or anybody on this webinar today doesn't know what the solution is. It's actually making the solution happen. That's the frustration. It isn't happening. It's when we speak to government, it's just speak, 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 and they keep promising us they're going to change it, and it's not changing fast enough. 14 months ago, I locked myself in a room with the DMRE for 2 days, and you can imagine how frustrating that was, and unpacked exactly what the challenges were on trying to get the regulatory environment working. We promised that by December we would have a pathway to actually stimulating the exploration sector. In March, the officers of the Minerals Council sat with the minister and with the DMRE and said, when can we publish this? We are ready to go. Yeah, this is a solution. And yeah, we sit in December and it's still not published. it's immensely frustrating. And it all comes down to, I always say to everybody, the cadastre isn't the solution, but the cadastre is the monitoring station for it. Once we've got this cadastre working, if it's a proper cadastre, it will become the coordinating control panel for all of our regulatory environments. And as soon as that's working and in place, investors will have comfort and they'll have trust in investing in exploration. And then the whole game will just kick in and it'll move. But we've got to get to that point.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and it's also called transparency. Errol, you'll know that better than me. You've worked in Australia and places like that. So lots to pick up on there. Sam, you're obviously in the hot seat too. The JSE, you know better than all of us the decline in the number of listed mining companies.
Yeah.
And the harsh reality is we actually don't have any real junior or listed junior exploration companies. So as I say, you're in the hot seat. Give us your views on how we can learn from jurisdictions outside South Africa who have very active exploration and mining boards, and
yes.
what the JSE is looking to do to correct the situation.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, John. So I think that junior miners and exploration in specifically are subject to two challenges. The one is that we are facing a net delistings, both globally and in South Africa, in terms of listed companies. And a lot of those companies delisting are the small caps. And of course, junior miners, exploration companies would be a subset of all of that. So that's the larger backdrop within which we have challenges in the mining sector, in the exploration sector. Secondly, obviously, there's certain focus points for exploration, and it's all around kind of that J curve that exploration companies do go through the valuation phases on their way to profitability. So we have been engaging with government, just like Errol and the Minerals Council has, around some of the things that could make it easier. And speaking of other jurisdictions that are attracting this kind of exploration, obviously, I think that the TSX, Toronto Stock Exchange, is a global leader in listing exploration companies. And in fact, some of the work done by the Minerals Council includes the flow-through shares scheme, where investors can get the write-offs of the tax write-offs of the companies themselves that are exploring. So if I have shares in an exploration company, I get that tax benefit write-off. And so that's something that I know that the Minerals Council has been leading the charge with. We've been supporting from the side. But unfortunately, that is kind of stuck somewhere in the system, and probably Errol can give more light to that. But in the broader small caps space, we've also looked at saying, what can we do that's within our control? And so we have published for consultation, a cutting red tape paper to say, is there things in the listings requirements that make life unnecessarily difficult without adding value to the broader ecosystem? And so our colleagues at Issuer Regulation have published some proposed amendments and are working through those amendments to look at that. We're also looking generally at just some of the liquidity challenges within the small cap space. As I mentioned, exploration companies being part of that, to say, can we issue like an ETF in that space, in the small cap space? We're happy to see Satrix has recently listed one of the largest broad-based ETFs that goes all the way to the tail end of our market, up to 100 issuer number 140 of the 330. So it's good to see that kind of focus on small caps. We're also looking at the challenge around research coverage and looking at solutions there. So we're seeing it as a broader ecosystem challenge. Some of it is regulatory. Some of it is work that we can do to make things a bit easier for listed companies, especially smaller caps. Some of it is around ecosystem issues like research coverage. And so we're working on a multi-pronged strategy to try and fix some of this.
Okay, great, Sam. So a couple of your points are quite critical there. We'll come back to the red tape and too much regulation. Okay, Paul, over to you. To your credit, you've done a tremendous amount of work on, looking at our minerals and mining sector, and you've published some real interesting stuff. So give us your take on, we have huge backlogs. We clearly have a cadastral system that doesn't work. Errol's commented on that. So let's hear your first take on, what we have and where we should be getting to. You there, Paul?
John, it looks as if his screen has frozen, so I don't know if we can just maybe get him to log out and log back in. Maybe we can just continue with the next person for now. You're on mute. Still.
Sorry. Okay, let's then go back to the IDC and get back to your comments, Thabiso. I mean, one of the things the IDC does is it has a huge amount of experience in the mining sector. You've obviously done lots of empowerment deals, some good, some bad. You've had some very bad experiences in the diamond space, unfortunately. But you must, and the one thing, obviously, in part of all of this with exploration, we need transformation. So do you see yourselves also, using your skills two ways? Would you set up an exploration desk, hopefully, if you're going to raise this money? And B, how would you then become involved and mentor, new entrants to the space? And Paul, are you back online? Okay, unmute yourself.
I am back.
Okay, give us 2 minutes. I've just asked Thabiso another question, and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, Thabiso.
Thanks, John. So we are well positioned, as an experienced funder, and one of our core competencies is conducting due diligences. I don't necessarily think that we need to establish an exploration fund from within the IDC, but we are all experienced in assessing businesses for funding opportunities. And what we would do is we would then look to managing this fund and assessing businesses that come through. And hopefully we'll get the right type of partners who are also partnering with us in exploring these minerals. And obviously, we put in some kind of an equity instrument into this type of things that is milestone based. And of course, there will be a level of call it supervision as we move along and hand holding. We normally would establish things like steering committees that are held on a regular basis to try and look at the process, assess progress to date, and determine next steps and further disbursements that may be required. So that's something that we have traditionally done, in our project development life cycle at the IDC, where we partner with people to do feasibility studies. That's how we manage these things. And I don't think necessarily we will need an exploration desk, but we will fit it into our existing infrastructure and okay. Systems and processes. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. So I'll come back to you, but the question I do have for you, because I've been there and I've been involved in technical studies. I mean, the IDC has very strong requirements when it comes to bankability of projects. Now, if we're going to go grassroots exploration, we're talking about exploration, high risk, 1 out of 100 projects probably succeed. So my question is, and I think, that's an important one, will you then do away with that and, have a division that manages this risk capital? Obviously, you've got to have clear guidelines, but But the IDC is typically a developmental institution, not necessarily a high risk-taking institution. So that's for you to think about while we go back to Paul. Paul, I don't know if you heard and you've got the questions, but let's do your number 1 and 2. How do we undo the logjam, and how do we potentially get to the 5% that the minister has discussed to get back to be sort of a competitive world player?
Well, I think it would help if we first diagnose the problem correctly. And
go for it.
I'm not sure that all counterparties to this negotiation have. If we go back to when the MPRDA and the Charter were negotiated and prior to 2002, there were 3 ingredients in that pot. There was the Chamber of Mines, the predecessor to the Minerals Council, who represented incumbent producing miners, which had no interest in exploration until, fortunately, Errol came along 4 years ago and started making that happen. Then we had the unions who wanted to improve the material conditions of existing employees. And then we had the government that wanted to open up the industry to those who'd been previously excluded. All had completely legitimate requirements in that negotiation. What wasn't in that negotiation was greenfields exploration. And now those ingredients have been cooking in a pot for 20 years, or 19 years. It'll be 20 years next year. And we now need to look at what the outcome is for exploration. Now that is abundantly clear. We had 5% of global exploration in 2004. This year, we'll have 0.76% of global exploration. So it has failed to attract a commensurate share of global exploration. We have never had, not since the time series began in 1994, less expenditure on mineral exploration and evaluation per Stats SA's own numbers. So the statistics are now in. The MPRDA and the Charter have not worked for exploration. Combine that with incontrovertible evidence that the administration has basically collapsed. 5,326 applications in backlog with no updates since that number was announced in February is enough evidence, I think, to say that if you combine bad policy with poor administration, you've got a serious problem. And now that's where I get very agitated, because it's clear that very few mines are still going to be operating in 15 to 20 years. And the global standard for developing a long life mine, a tier 1 mine, take from discovery to production is between 10 and 20 years. So the time is now, if young people entering this industry are still to have jobs beyond their early 40s. And that is why I put out statistics, because I don't think we've analyzed the problem properly. And when you see the minister announced 3 years ago that he wanted to attract 5% of global exploration for South Africa, and then did nothing except announce every 6 months or so that his target was still 5% of global exploration in 5 years. Now, I mean, it's exasperating to think that we can supposedly identify a problem and then actually do nothing. Because as much as I understand that stuff might be happening in smoky, dark rooms and excluding the public, excluding the citizens of South Africa, being negotiated between industry and government and labor, the fact is, until something's actually produced, nothing has happened. So I'm afraid I'm very negative on the likelihood of this minister, this DMR, this government being able to address this issue at all. And perhaps we should just accept that our minerals are going to stay in the ground, and it's the grandchildren of today's exploration geologists who are going to have an opportunity to actually discover those minerals. Because I don't see any evidence that there's any will to fix it at the moment.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, very candid and very to the point, and I think many of us share your frustration. Errol, back to you. So you kind of have been at the workface. You have relationships, obviously through the Mining Council and even your company with the powers that be and the DMRE. And you also, I think, are working quite closely with the Council for Geoscience in the Namaqualand. So give us your take, from the Mineral Council point of view of where you see things going and what your experiences have been.
Well, firstly, I'd have to say that I'm still in this industry, so I can't agree with Paul. But there are days that I feel the same way as Paul, and that's certainly a fact. But the matter of fact is this generalization that the DMRE or this or the Council for Geoscience or that is probably one of our first failings, because there are some cells of excellence that still sit in there, and our view is let's work with those guys that want to actually make a positive impact, and let's find a way of making it happen. Yes, I think we're all frustrated that the minister, as at the end of the day, is the captain of the ship, and the ship is sinking, and he's got to take the responsibility for it. And we'd like to see him move and move a lot quicker than what is happening. But the reality is he started off with a portfolio that was bust. It was an absolute mess and a fiasco. Remember that the Minerals Council was absolutely at open warfare with the previous minister when Minister Mantashe came in. So things have improved from that perspective, that at least now we can speak to each other to some extent. Since then, he's inherited the Department of Energy, which is another fiasco. So started fixing minerals, put a lot of energy into it, started getting people around the table, and things were going very nicely, thank you. And then he inherited another bag of tricks that was an absolute mess, and he's distracted doing that. And now I just get absolute shock and appalled. I'm appalled that the suggestion is there that his department must now take Eskom as well. Well, listen, yeah, there's only so many sucker punches that you can put in one bag, man. How can we expect one man to actually sort out this mess? So the problem starts at the top. The government has to actually make the right appointments. And from the top down, from the minister down, they have to be actually empowered to do it with the resources required to do it. And whoever is responsible, we need a DMR political leadership, and then the bureaucratic leadership actually have to fall in place. The amount of times that the minister has said to me, Errol, your complaint about Section 2D is not true because I've instructed every one of my departments that there will not be black empowerment requirement for prospecting permit to be granted. But you speak to any prospector out there and they'll know that they face this. Every time you lodge an application, there'll be a Section 2D demand. So black economic empowerment is still a requirement of applying for a prospecting right. We can't have this disparity between what the minister does and what his officers, the regional managers are actually doing. So we've got to get alignment there. We've got to make sure that the bureaucrats that are holding the pen and are shuffling the paper aren't more incentivized to keep the job of shuffling the paper than what they are of actually giving the solution and granting a prospecting right. And I'll also, I've got a major bugbear about a couple of things. Is the heart of it is the DMRE. The DMRE is the custodian of the mineral rights in this country. But every one of the other departments has a role to play in this thing. I mean, we've just seen this disastrous NEMA regulation come through, or with the withdrawal of a portion of the act. In 1994, the government took away mineral rights from private ownership and put them in the custodianship of the Minister of Mines so that they could be distributed. The DMRE have failed to enforce that in the way that, as a prospector, it has been difficult to get access to land. So you've got massive swaths of farming land in this country that we've had to deal for years and years negotiating with farmers for access. Fortunately, there was always this underlying law that at the end of the day, the farmer could get just compensation. And there was a system that you could go through to get that. And then NEMA, in their brilliance, decided to cancel that regulation out of the Environmental Act. So now, before you can apply for a prospecting right, you've got to negotiate access agreement with the landowner, the farmer, largely, on a black box basis, including the compensation agreement. Before you've ever put foot on the ground to see what's there, you've got to agree the compensation terms with the farmer that owns the land. So what's happened? We've completely wasted what the MPRDA was all about. It's
Okay.
put control of the mineral rights back in the hands of the farmers. So we've got to get all the ministers working together, John, in the right direction.
No, 100%, Errol. And I mean, I work quite closely with some of the youngsters at the CGS, and there's some really wonderful people there. And you tell us a bit about your positive experiences, if I can call it that, in Namaqualand.
Yeah, and look, there are centers of excellence, and the CGS has got some very smart people there, and they're frustrated. They also need budget, and they need access to data, and they can do great things. We've started slowly but surely. We started working with them on the geophysical side of things, and we found by sharing data, it just expedited. It moved our understanding forward a lot faster. We are one of the few companies that actually spends on greenfields exploration. We've spent massive amounts on geophysical surveys, airborne geophysical surveys, and the like. We're sharing that data with the Council for Geoscience. They've managed to get the budget to buy software to do processing, and they've got some very smart people. And by our industry geologists working with their research geologists, we are actually making progress. And it's also this other big problem of the historic data having been divorced from the mineral title. You know, that's a mess. The CGS are supposed to be custodians of that, but largely it's been stolen, or it's gone, or it's in a mess and they can't access all of it. They are busy fixing it up, but it's going to take a big task. But in the hands of industry are copies of most of that data. And it's to industry's responsibility now to actually bring it back and actually make it available, because that's the only way we're going to unlock this impasse on the data being available to the explorers.
Yeah, Errol, and you hit on a critical thing is, information. Look at Australia. I mean, they went and scanned and downloaded, 150 years of information, and the new discoveries coming out of some of that old information is amazing. How's it, Reginald? Welcome to the show, and we'll get back to you. But we've got Sam at the moment talking about so I'm switching back to Sam, and we want to get to the chat box and not the chat box Q&A and start answering questions. Just your quick take, and you mentioned it, and Errol has just highlighted it, red tape, regulations that are suddenly, disallowed, and how are you as the JSE a critical player in this, looking to cut red tape and make it simpler for the little guys?
Yeah, so John, I think what we've done in response to COVID specifically is made quick rights issues and capital raising a lot easier and a lot simpler. But my colleagues were talking about the fact that even just the sheer volume of sometimes the listings requirements is something that can be a hindrance. And so the team is looking at a redraft, but essentially starting to say, what are those regulations that can lighten specifically your ongoing obligations as a listed company? And so that's work that's ongoing and hopefully will be concluded in the early part of 2022, and we'll release that. One thing I wanted to just also highlight is that we are seeing all over the world that capital formation is also starting to happen a lot in the unlisted space. So venture capital and private equity has been growing. Obviously, in the exploration space, it's more VC than private equity, and so we are launching a new platform called JSE Private Placements, also in the new year, where we are looking to attract at least the capital base that we've got from all over the world on our listed market. We're saying, how do we attract that into the unlisted space, into the venture capital space, because our venture capital and private equity has a long way to grow in terms of international benchmarks. And so we're hoping that to the exploration ecosystem, we'll be able to offer both of these platforms, our private platform as well as our listed platform, which has been around for 130 years, as places where capital formation can happen for that exploration ecosystem.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, we need that venture capital and risk capital, and preferably, you know, overseas people who are prepared to throw it at exploration.
Indeed.
To be so, and you've got your colleague to help you. Go back to my point of, you know, your very strict requirements in terms of projects normally require them to be bankable. Now, you know, very few initial exploration projects or even ideas will be bankable. So how do you both suggest we handle that?
Yes, no, I mean, there is just no ways that an exploration project would be bankable, John. So obviously we're going to have to come up with a new criteria of assessing the partners that we're going to be looking into exploration with. And that is something that we can do. We adapt quite easily at the IDC. So, I mean, obviously it will be the typical checks that we do in terms of compliance to FICA and stuff like that. And then we can go ahead. I mean, this is risk capital that we want to be putting in the ground if this fund gets moving. And we'll go ahead and try and see how we can assist as we move along. But fortunate enough, what we'll be doing is we will potentially be creating a pipeline of projects that can get to that stage, John, that you're talking about of being banked at some point, and then, you know, fund them going forward for implementation. Thanks.
Good. Okay, I've got a whole lot of small diamond projects for you that I'm going to bring to your desk and see if we can get past that bankable requirement. Okay. Paul, you lost that at the front, so let's just pick up quickly on you know, your solutions. Do we see any progress on this cadastre system?
Look, I think there are lots of people who are agitating for this. I think it's going to become very apparent in the next year or two, imminently, that we've got a problem beyond the life of mine of our existing mines. There'll always be some mines that are going to go on practically forever, but we've got a problem if we want to attract young people into this industry with the hope that they're going to have a full career in the industry. But just to touch on three things. First of all, I'm thrilled that the IDC is initiating a fund. I think that's really important that they do that, and it's a good place. It's got good skills. And that 200 or 300 million rand from the IDC and its partners, combined with the total budget of the CGS, which is 550 million rand, would be about 1/10 of what's required to take us to the 8 billion rand that we require to take us to about 5% of global exploration. So how do we fill the next bit? And that's not to take away from that. We need to attract South Africans to invest in exploration, and we need to attract foreigners to invest in South African exploration. And I think it's important to size the elephant in the room. The elephant is an 8 billion rand a year elephant. And that's going to take more than local initiatives. It's going to take more than small initiatives by each party. It needs a big strategy to attack it. So for example, we need public market development to attract funding for exploration. So when we have incentives, they must be incentives that both incentivize exploration and the participation in and development of our public markets. And then when the regulator issues a prospecting license, they've got to understand that most prospecting licenses will not discover a mine, but they do generate knowledge. And that knowledge is the patrimony of South Africa, and it needs to be curated. So when a prospecting right is relinquished, the payback for the state, for the people of South Africa, should be that the knowledge is then collected and turned over to the next person who wants to have a look. So we really need to take a longer term view, take a big picture view, realize how big the problem is, and that we can't solve it with our current MPRDA and charter. It cannot be solved. We've been trying to do it for 19 years. At what point is there enough evidence to say it's not working?
Yeah, 100%, Paul, and you raise a critical point there. And I mean, you talk 8 billion, and that's huge in the life of South African jobs, but we haven't yet started then talking about the leverage on that when you do start finding mineral deposits and developing new mines. Okay, Reginald, have you got a quick comment there? And then we really need to get on to questions and make sure we covering the needs of the participants as well. Reginald, would you like to just throw in a comment? You've got a lot of experience in this business. You and Paul work together. What's your take on how the IDC gets this process going as well?
Yeah, afternoon, colleagues and Paul. So Paul brought me into the financial services at Nedbank in 2004. Actually, it was the first time that I was interviewed with someone pitching to me to come and work for them. Now, I think that so as the IDC, obviously, our role is more around financing and how we crowd in funding, from the markets as well as from the private sector. I've no doubt that if you look at the gap that Paul is talking about of 8 billion per annum, for example, it can be closed. One way of doing that is to look at an exploration fund that has B credentials. B credentials in the form of facilitation of ESD credits. So your enterprise and supplier development credits. We know that companies are required under the DTIC codes, for example, to spend a certain percentage of their profits or revenues per annum towards the ESD. If we can put all of that together into a fund that has B facilitator status or credentials, it means that on an annual basis, companies can set aside some of that budget into that fund. So suddenly, you look at the sector, you look at the size of the companies that we have and the profits they're generating. Obviously, during a commodity boom like we're experiencing now, suddenly you can have a fund with critical mass. So what we're looking at as an IDC is how do we get DMRE and DTIC to give us facilitator status as the IDC, crowding this funding, and then it's channeled through us into exploration. So I've no doubt that I think we can achieve that. It does take time. Hopefully, with the likes of Errol working with the Minerals Council to unlock the regulatory and policy issues. And of course, the JSE opening and educating markets towards exploration, it can certainly be done. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Time is of the essence. Let's start going to our participants. Errol, the question came in before the actual webinar today. The construction mafia, it's not particularly aimed at exploration, but obviously, if you're going to explore, you want a nice, safe working environment out there. So what's your sort of latest take on that? And then another important question, just a quick one, how has COVID affected you guys? I think we all saw the companies being leaders in terms of the mining companies putting protocols in place to keep working. So just to get the ball rolling from the attendees.
John, the construction mafia is an element of exploration, because if there isn't a value chain that that you're eventually going to be able to mine a mine, then nobody's going to invest in exploration. So it's part of the exploration investment decision. Can you mine without interference from any mafia or any untoward elements? Ryan, we went through an awful experience earlier in the year, and there were people that were involved in instigating community actions for an untoward way, and it had a big damage to us, because the first money that gets cut when you struggle to raise capital is exploration money. Then all the money goes into mine development. So it is a problem, and it's a problem of South Africa, and it's the same as everything else. We need to operate in an environment where there's law and order. And unless there's law and order, nobody can operate. It doesn't matter if you're doing exploration or whether you're a medical doctor or anything, you cannot operate unless there's law and order. So that's just a standard of the society that we operate in, and I think everybody recognizes it, that's something that's got to be dealt with, and it will be dealt with. As far as COVID is concerned, yeah, the biggest challenge with COVID, we can manage it very easily, and we've got all of our staff vaccinated, and we set up vaccination facilities, and through the Minerals Council, all the juniors and the small diamond miners and everybody got access to vaccination facilities. So there was a network that was formed, and we pulled together as an industry, and we made vaccinations available. So we can operate with very little impact. But the impact has been the inability to get to the investors and raise the money. And that's the impact. I was supposed to be in London this week and raising money. You know, I can't do that. I've got to sit here and try to do it across a video screen. That does not work as well. And that's just the reality. And it's a true reality that all of my peers in the Minerals Council have pointed out the same thing. So that has had an impact. There's been less money raised for exploration over the last 12 months.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. No, important point. Paul, just a question back to you from a panelist, actually, Roy Irvin. He makes the point that back in things like the 70s, 80s, 90s, the big companies also had very strong exploration budgets, and we saw that in De Beers. I mean, De Beers in the 70s and with the discovery of Phoenicia early in the 80s, spent major money on minerals or on diamond exploration. What's changed? Why did the companies move out of that activity?
Well, look, there was a general trend where the major producers at one point decided that it was the job of juniors to discover new deposits, and that they would buy them once they had gone up the value curve. And we saw that with international companies with no real South African context also closing down their exploration. So, for example, BHP pulled back from exploration, whereas Rio Tinto didn't, neither of which were at the time particularly South African strategies. However, it is important to know that in South Africa in 2002, between 2000 and 2002, when the MPRDA and Charter were negotiated, was also at the time when companies were beginning to internationalize. And our producers in South Africa knew full well that they would be able to pursue project pipelines anywhere in the world. So why fight for South Africa's project pipeline? They chose not to. They chose to protect their sunk capital in their existing operations, and they let exploration slide as a negotiating point. And we came out with a regulatory environment that was not fit for purpose for exploration. And the evidence is now 19 years later, that our policy and our regulatory environment is not fit for purpose. And now, just to compound that, the MPRDA had a wonderful silver lining in that it took privately held mineral rights, placed them in the custodianship of the state, and made them available for anyone to license if they met the licensing conditions. And that's actually the international best practice. Now, NEMA has placed those mineral rights back in the control of the landowner, the surface rights owner, by requiring the surface rights owner's permission to make an EIA application, an environmental application to do prospecting rights. So we've actually gone full circle to where the only silver lining of the MPRDA, which was access to ground, which is what led to somewhat of a boom in junior mining prior to the global financial crisis, has now been reversed. And the property owners, the surface rights owners, now control access to the mineral rights and can negotiate their commercial terms. So we've actually undone the major benefit of the MPRDA, which was freeing up those mineral rights. I think the other point I'd like to make is that any crowding in or incentivization of exploration from a financial perspective, which is all very important, must also serve to incentivize our public capital markets. It's no surprise that the major markets for risk capital for exploration are the most active public markets. 29% of inflows into Canada, and I think it's 19% of inflows into the Australian market, come from individual investors. In South Africa, we've structured our savings industry to exclude individual investors. We've become an institutionalized savings industry, and it's the small end of the market that suffers, and it's obviously exploration and junior mining companies that are in the small end of the market. So it's not the JSE's fault. It's not the JSE's rules fault. There's nothing different in the JSE's rules to other major markets around the world. It's how we've structured our savings industry so that only 11 major asset managers, 2 of which are about to merge, so there'll be 10, manage over 90% of all the money in South Africa, all the savings. And they cannot, by definition, be interested in the smaller end of the market. They are just too big, too concentrated. So we've actually got a problem in our financial services industry, which is impacting on the future of our mining companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Very, very pertinent point. Sam, just come back to you, and then Errol, I'm going to come back to you. And I see you started to answer it on the chat group, not chat Q&A. There's a participant asking about, why are we going to impact BEE again? Well, actually, exploration should do exactly the opposite. It should be creating opportunities, and I think some of that came out in the IDC discussion. So maybe you want to pick up on that one. I think you were following the question. But Sam, the Altex and making things simpler.
Yeah. So so Franco, thanks for your chat point there. So Altex was hugely successful when it started in 2007, and obviously from a macro perspective, it was a very different time. It was kind of the boom before the global financial crisis crash, and so Altex was excellent in making it easier for smaller companies to get through the gate and to be listed. Now, we haven't made those gates any harder to get into since 2007, but we've seen that number of entrants decline, and so it's a whole host of reasons, including obviously the macro environment that we are all working under the cloud of. But we're saying again, I guess like Errol mentioned earlier, it doesn't help to kind of point fingers at other issues to say what can we fix as JSE. And so we are giving a rethink to Altex. Do we scrap it? Do we start something different? One of our colleagues in Lagos at the Nigerian Stock Exchange are looking at a tech board, which in their mind, they're saying, we're seeing Nigerian tech unicorns raising capital from Silicon Valley, but can't raise capital on our own exchange because by definition, our rules don't allow a tech startup that's blowing through hundreds of millions of naira or whatever it is to list on the exchange. And so how do we make that more appropriate? So those are the kind of thoughts that we're having ourselves as well. And certainly mining and exploration is part of our consideration to say, is there anything, notwithstanding Paul's very poignant point about the buy side, is there anything that we're still doing that's hindering growth in this sector?
And your competition in Cape Town, is that going to wake you up as well?
So, everybody asks me about that. First of all, it's just a rebranding, from 4AX to Cape Town. But what excites me about what they're trying to do is they're really trying to target that SME market, and we also have our own initiatives to really target the SME market. Our private placements offering is pointed at that, and I think that there's more than enough need to get capital to SMEs that I hope that we all succeed. So that's my view of Cape Town Stock Exchange.
Good. Okay. Errol, that's obviously important question. We're not looking to exclude people. In fact, if we have a healthy exploration sector, it should be good for everyone. You muted, Errol. Errol? No.
The exploration sector is brilliant because you don't have to wait to exploit a mineral to actually transfer value to the participants in the industry. If we get this 8 billion rand target that the minister sort of suggested we should be targeting, most of that money gets spent in South Africa, and it gets spent immediately. Within 12 months of getting the 8 billion bucks, it will be spent. And hopefully it won't be spent on buying my Benzes and flying to Dubai. It'll actually be spent on employing people, paying for laboratories, doing services and upskilling people. And explorers operate in remote parts of the country. So we tend to employ from remote communities that otherwise don't get access to the cities and where the financial hubs are. So explorers are a great way of distributing value, because when we go into a remote place in the Macqualand, we don't drive all the way to Kimberley to get a vehicle fixed. We get it fixed in Kenhardt or in Nicaraguaa or somewhere, and we use a local mechanic. And it's that kind of opportunity that transfers value. Unfortunately, the value equation for investors in the sector, and this is a tough thing, you know, you can't throw the baby out with bathwater. An investor sitting in London with his £100 says, if I invest in Botswana and I make a discovery and this discovery is worth £200, I get £100 return on my investment. If I do it in South Africa, if there is BEE obligation from day one, I've still got to invest £100 because it's very difficult to find BEE partners that have got access to the capital. And that's the problem. There isn't access to capital for the BEE participants that want to be in this high-risk industry. And I don't know if it's appropriate for people that have to lend money from the IDC or somebody and be on risk to be investing it in exploration, because exploration is high risk. 9 out of 10 exploration efforts fail. And should people that have limited access to capital be investing in that high risk end? It's got to be on a choice basis, not on a force basis. So the simple fact is Botswana is getting the money and Namibia is getting the money, because that investor in London or in Perth or in Toronto knows that he can get 100% return on his investment. Whereas in South Africa, he can only get a 70% return on his investment. And they vote with their money, and the money's not coming here. So you can say what you like and what's good. I think we've got to look at the fact is that let's create the value chain. Let's get the discoveries. When we get the discoveries, the mines get built, and then they can be banked and financed. And that's when you can get the big transfer value with a lower risk profile that's probably more appropriate for transformation.
Yeah, Errol, that's a critical point. And I think that's something, you know, we as geologists and explorers also need to get across to the communities. You know, firsthand, you know, what your work and the expenditure you're spending in Prieska and the Northern Cape and the Macqualand, you know, it's huge in people's lives out there. And I was quite fortunate to be involved in the very early stages of the diamond discoveries and exploration in the Northwest Territories of Canada. And when you went to Yellowknife back then, it was a one-horse, you know, town where the guys came to get drunk and go to the other places, you know. And if you go back there today to see the benefits to Indigenous people, it's just huge, and the training and the jobs. And, you know, it's the same as Botswana. We all forget about this little country north of us, you know, that got transformed by 2 real wonderful diamond discoveries through some exceptional exploration. So look, guys, I think we and Shannon, we sort of passed the 2:30 or 3:30 mark. I'm happy to go on, and I'm sure some of the panelists equally. I think there were a couple of people that might have to leave, but do you want us to keep going and, you know, answer some more of the questions?
I think, John, yes, let's continue for about another 15 minutes. You can go through the Q&A and just see which ones you'd like to answer. Some of them have been answered via typed answer, so that's quite handy. Paul, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to make the point that we need more joined up thinking, right? So the exploration can't be developed without financial markets being developed. And exploration can't succeed unless information and knowledge is curated and retained in the past. And we need to understand the cycle of things. You know, this is a very cyclical industry, and you need to invest counter-cyclically. We need the Council for Geoscience to do the primary pure research that crowds in commercial exploration. We need the IDC to put their fund together to crowd in other people to invest. We need the information to be retained and made available to the next generation. It all needs to tie together. And specifically when we go and lobby the National Treasury for tax incentives, You know, a tax incentive for exploration must benefit the stock exchanges in South Africa too. And that's really my appeal, is that we've got a huge problem to solve, and the initiatives that we come up with must be joined up to be simplistic. That's the point.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And I mean, I think that goes back to the point I'm trying to make. We've got to look at, and what you're making, you got to look at this holistically. You know, it's got to benefit the greater good. It's not just, you know, this little bit or the JSE. And I think the point that we need to also get across, you know, quite fundamentally is the benefit to rural areas and communities. I mean, if you travel around the Northwest and the Northern Cape province at the moment, it's very depressing out there. And Errol would have seen that firsthand. Okay, so let's just, I'll go through the Q&A, but Errol, just start wrapping up. So we've got another 10 minutes. Your quick 5-minute take, you know, how do we solve this ASAP?
I'd just like to just very quickly speak to Paul's point there, and I think it's critical. And our proposal that we took to National Treasury about a flow-through scheme, we got the top tax brains in this country to donate their time and work on it, and to actually look at our tax laws and do economic analysis. And at every R1 that gets spent on exploration in South Africa, 35 Rand ends up in National Treasury's tax pockets within the 12-month period. So a tax break, a 12-month tax break, actually flows straight back to National Treasury. So that is something that we have to stimulate. All of these things have to go hand in hand. We do have to get, and you know, I've fight on the regulatory side, but I also fight on the financial services side. We have all of these discussions about why aren't investors investing? Well, why haven't we got the financial services guys? Yeah, why aren't they telling their clients that it is a viable investment decision? Because for those few of us that are listed on the JSE, I mean, we've got 17,000 South African shareholders, the vast majority of which are Black South Africans. So there is an appetite in South Africa, and people will invest if they are given the opportunity. I think it's the fund managers, the wealth managers, the pension managers that are not directing money to there. And it can't be all the pension money, but there's a discretionary amount of money that can be directed towards exploration. And there are hundreds, thousands of exploration companies here that are, if they're given that cash injection, everybody benefits. The rural communities benefit, SARS benefits, and everybody's a winner in this country. And that's what we've got to unlock. So we have to extend this discussion beyond the miners. You know, everybody complains about why isn't the Minerals Council getting the minister to do the right thing for all of our efforts that we try. But we also need the financial services guys to come to this table. And the JSE is a viable exchange. It does work. It's worked for us, and it can work for others as well.
Yeah, Errol, and never forget, this country has the most amazing entrepreneurs. You almost need to be an entrepreneur today to survive. You know, the guys sitting on the street corner selling fruit and vegetables, and we've got to harness and unlock that, you know, that talent and expertise. So back to the IDC, as we just wrap up, Thabiso and Reginald, a couple of parting shots from you. And just before you go, Oliver Barker, yeah, I agree, and I think this whole panel agrees. You know, we've got to get a real smart cadastral system working, you know, and we see what Botswana are doing right this minute. They are revamping or rebuilding their cadastral system, and if anyone hasn't been up there lately, Botswana's busy. There are lots of small and medium companies active there. Thabiso and Reginald.
Okay, thanks, John. Perhaps let me start by something that I saw on the chat very quickly before I give my parting shot. Which is inaccurate about the IDC. We funded quite a number of juniors in the past couple of years, and I've been here long enough to have seen that. In the past couple of 5 years, for example, I can name at least 10 companies, some of which have now graduated from using IDC funding. We have de-risked them, and now they're using commercial banks to fund some of their businesses. So that is a myth that the IDC really does not fund juniors and smaller companies in the world. Just as a clarity point, again, what we are saying is we are not saying we are funding exploration. We are saying we are looking at an opportunity to crowdfund an exploration fund that can be used for early stage exploration. So, you know, just so for avoidance of doubt, to just be clear on this table that, you know, we're not going to have 200 applications to the IDC tomorrow saying IDC funds exploration. And our commitment then, John, as a parting shot, is to ensure that this fund happens, is to ensure from our side that we can use our facilitator status, BE facilitator status, is to make sure that we can bring the DMRE to the party and ensure that we can also now talk to people like Errol to bring the industry to the party also, to try and have as much money into this fund as possible, like Raj was saying earlier on. Hopefully over time, as I said, we will be able to get to those numbers that you mentioned of 8 billion rands. And I think that that's the commitment that we're putting on the table from an IDC perspective going forward. Thank you.
Fantastic, and thanks for that positive comment. And you've explained yourself, and that's very important. And I'll still be bringing a project to you as well. Reginald.
I think Taris has covered everything from our side. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, fantastic. Paul, your wrap up.
Yeah, I'd like the IDC to list some of its interests in some of the investments that it's held for so long and so successfully, as an effort to reignite the JSE. But perhaps we can have that discussion offline.
Okay, good stuff. Errol, your last comments, suggestions, and I think I'd also just like to say thanks to everyone. And before I get there, Errol, sorry to cut you off, but the discussion was really good, and I must say it's a pleasure to listen to the people who know this business, and appreciate all the questions we've had. So well done to Creamer Media and Shannon and Renette and everyone else, and obviously Martin and Kenneth. And hopefully, you know, we can now start seeing some progress. We obviously need to find clever ways of getting all of this expertise. And the one thing that's not lacking in South Africa is expertise and experience. We just have so much of it, and somehow we've got to use it better, and we've got to get particularly government to listen to us. Errol.
Yeah, John, thanks a lot. And I just basically close with what I started with, is we all know exactly what the elephant in the room is, and we all know how to eat it in little bites. What we've got to do is start eating. And we need political will at the top to make this all happen, because everybody knows what the solutions are. It can be done very, very quickly if the political will is there.
Yeah, agreed. So thanks to everyone. Shannon, do you want to end off?
Yes, thanks very much, John. I really appreciate it. That does bring us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Dr. John Bristow for enabling a robust and engaging discussion. And thank you very much to our panelists, Tabiso Sekano and Reginald Damana from the IDC, Sam Okorosi from the JSE, Errol Smart from Minerals Council South Africa's Junior Miners Desk, and Paul Miller from Amaranth CX. Thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us in this discussion. I know there are lots of other things you could have been doing, so we really appreciate that you joined us, particularly as we went a little bit over time. We thank you for that. We do hope that you found it engaging and informative. And finally, a very, very big thank you to the IDC for making this webinar possible. So the recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course. And if you have any additional questions, please do be in touch. We do have a list of all the questions that came through the Q&A, so we will try and get back to you on those. And if you do have anything else, you can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you for your time. Stay safe and stay well, and goodbye.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks to everyone. And I guess if there are questions there that you think we should still respond to, please pass them on to myself and the group, and we'll gladly get back to those ones that we perhaps didn't answer as well as we should have.
We'll do that. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, guys, ladies.